we need to remember here, Peter Collignon, that yes, these two maladministrations of the Pfizer jab did happen in elderly aged care residents, but there have been no adverse effects.
Yeah, unlike other drugs, if you overdose somebody on insulin, for instance, it has a dramatic effect on the person straight away. With vaccines, the main problem with overdosing them is that they might end up with a sore arm or maybe a bit more fever because you're giving them what we call a bit more antigen than normal. So there's not this same dose problem. But what it does show is that the directions weren't followed. I mean, what is all these vaccines that are coming out for COVID in the short term and for the moment are in multi-dose vials. So that's very different from all the other vaccines we give in Australia where they're usually single dose and often preloaded. So it actually means that people training have to be trained because I presume in this case they didn't realise it was a multi-dose vial and gave a substantial part of the vial to one person instead of 5 or 6. So that's actually the problem. And the other problem with multi-dose vials, they've got other problems with increased chance of cross-infections and other infections occurring compared to single-use. So all of that means you do need training. That's why these modules were in place. And the impression I get is the person who was involved in this particular situation hadn't done that training, because if they had, they would have realised that that was an issue. Now, the same problem has also occurred in a number of countries in Europe as well, I might say. So far, I'm not aware that overdosing people with this has caused any great extra harm. I mean, again, it might give you a sore arm than you need, etc. But, that's good news. But we don't want this to happen. Vaccines are in short supply. So if one person gets enough dose for 4 or 5 people, it means another 4 people missed out. And at the moment, that's a real problem because it means there's increased waste. And also, you've got to have almost the exact number turning up, read the dose that you've got in the vial, whether it's 5 or 6 out of a vial or 10. If you actually don't have that amount of people coming, in other words, 24 or 30 rather than 21, you'll waste a lot of the last vial you've got. So, there's a whole lot of other logistic issues as well to make sure we don't waste vaccine, particularly when it's in short supply.
These two patients are okay. They're 88 and 94 years old, and we wish them all the very best. But Peter, I think the biggest tragedy out of all of this is that it's undermined the vaccine rollout, and it's made people a little bit worried who were probably already worried about getting the vaccine in the first place. What do you say to them?
Well, I think it's unfortunate, particularly because it occurred so early. I guess on the bright side, you can see this was picked up. If we didn't have so many checks and balances, maybe it would have gone through and nobody would have noticed. But yeah, look, it is unfortunate. I think vaccine hesitancy is an issue. I think more data will come out. From my perspective, the data on the vaccines we're likely to have available in Australia, they appear to be as safe as, for instance, influenza vaccines. No really untoward side effects that are really serious, other than allergies maybe in some people, but less than 1 in 100,000 people with the Pfizer vaccine. They appear to be effective. You've got to remember the influenza vaccine is 30, 50% efficacy. This has got 80, 90% against causing severe disease and death. So much more effective. And for a disease that is much more, probably 10 times as much chance of killing you as influenza. So all of it is good news so far. Yes, we need more data. There's groups we don't have enough data on, pregnant women, for instance. We don't have vaccines for children yet, but that'll all happen over the next year. And with the rapid rollout that's happened in places like Europe and America, there'll be a lot more data collected that will, if you like, reassure all of us that the preliminary data or the reasonable data we got so far for it's effective and it's safe will continue to show that that's the case. So far it's all looking good. We need more data. I quite think it's reasonable for people to say, I'd like to see, more data before I go. But in the short term, the problem we've got is more people on the queue than will have vaccine rather than worrying about people not showing up. But that'll be an issue in about 6 months and we'll have a lot more data by then. But so far, it's all looking remarkably good.
All right, onwards and upwards. What did you think of Jane Malashak? She was a pretty good ambassador earlier this week.
Well, I'm not quite sure I saw that segment, but so you might have to fill me in.
Well, she was the first person to get the vaccine
Oh,
alongside Scott Morrison on Sunday, and
yeah,
she was a pretty
yeah,
good advocate, I
yeah.
can tell
With
you.
the V or the
That's
yes, I
right.
did see that. I missed the name.
Don't you
Yeah,
start doing it.
yeah, look, I actually think she was a very good ambassador. Sorry for not remembering her name. But look, the reality is we're going to have more and more people vaccinated in Australia, and it'll become obvious that people aren't having any problems as time goes on. And the more people are vaccinated, the more everybody will be assured because they'll know people themselves who've been vaccinated. So that's really good news.
Yeah.
The big advantage we've got in Australia, we've got no community transmission or very little. So we don't have to rush this because we don't have lots of people dying. We will be in a position by winter. We'll have nearly all the people over the age of 70 vaccinated, plus the frontline quarantine and healthcare workers. In other words, even if we do get other clusters, the effect of that should be much more containable. And the dramatic effect, if it gets into the elderly, of death and hospital admission, will be markedly decreased because we'll have so many of them vaccinated. So we've got the luxury of doing this properly, making sure people are all accredited, auditing and checking if that's happened, because we can actually do this in an appropriate fashion and not worry about having to rush it because we've got uncontrolled infection, because we don't. And my hope is we won't get that either.